is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation with Tom Swarbrick.
We've seen how the politics of net zero have changed since that result in Uxbridge a fortnight or so ago. Both Starmer and Sunak are trying to show you that they are live to the difficulties and costs that net zero throws up. And I have sat here for the last few years charting those difficulties, whether it's with heat pumps or changes to EPC ratings if you're trying to let your home out, or taxes on energy bills. The way in which we get to net zero has not been voted for. There is not a general consent to how this is going to get done. Dr. Rupert Reed is co-founder of the Climate Majority Project. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. As the argument is set out there, I wonder what the response is. Hi.
Well, it's a fascinating discussion you've initiated here, Tom, and thank you for the thoughtful and detailed way that you're approaching it. There's so many aspects of it we could discuss. Let me start with one important one, which is that the net zero policies are not just about achieving carbon net zero. They have very significant potential co-benefits as well. So, for example, imagine if we were to have a housing stock in this country that was actually fit for purpose. The incredible fact is that a third of roofs in Britain don't have any insulation at all. I'm not talking about inadequate insulation. I'm talking about they don't have any. Mm-hmm. Imagine that we were to actually take some of the money, for example, that the oil companies are getting right now in windfall profits and put that into insulating our roofs properly. If we were to do that, then, of course, quite quickly, we wouldn't need so much energy from whatever source. I mean, right now we're heating the sky, all over Britain, in people's houses, we're heating the sky. So that's one of many kind of potential co-benefits here. And if we pursue those co-benefits rigorously, they really start to add up. And we start to look at a future where our well-being is going up at the same time and precisely through our support of net zero policies.
Nevertheless, in getting to net zero by 2050, there are going to be, aren't there? We've seen it already, costs to normal people going about their everyday lives that right now, partly because of the economic climate we're in, they just can't afford. It's a luxury.
Well, that's why we need to look for these co-benefits, right? I think that people are starting to kind of join up the dots to understand, for example, that the Ukraine crisis and the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis, they're all the same thing. Because the way you can tackle them all simultaneously is by insulating our homes properly, is by switching us to renewable energy so we're no longer dependent
but people get
upon
that.
dictators.
Listen, Dr. Reed, I think people understand that. And people want that. People want energy security. They want a greener planet. They want a cleaner planet. They want to heat their homes properly and not heat the sky or the surrounding area outside it and spend money doing so. They want that. But the reality is, in getting to net zero by 2050... there are going to be costs involved for people or changes to what they would wish to do to try and bring around that target of net zero by 2050 that they don't like, they don't want, they don't think are necessary.
But Tom, this is what I'm seeking to say to you and to listeners, that actually if we get the policy mix right, which at the moment this government is incredibly steaming in the wrong direction, then actually those things all start to point in the right direction and they all start to add up together. So it's actually a canard. It's just not true to say that net zero 2050 is going to have enormous costs for individuals. On the contrary, if we get the policy mix right, then actually it will be to everybody's benefit. It will be to the benefit of ordinary people in terms of quality of life, in terms of having warm, comfortable homes. I mean, that's what we all want, isn't it? We all want for our children, for example. But who pays
for the insulation? Who pays for the...
Exactly. Well, yeah. So the government should pay for the insulation principally, and the way they should pay for it, for starters, is by taxing fossil fuels adequately. And when you do that, you have two simultaneous really, really good effects. One is that you rake in a huge amount of money with which you can do this sort of thing. The other is that you start to actually reduce the perverse incentives that there are at the moment to use fossil fuels rather than other sources of energy. And let's remember that the cost of renewable energy is plunging through the floor at the very same time as the cost of fossil energy just keeps on increasing as we try to get fossil energy from more and more obscure places. Let's also remember But the argument that the government use that by having our own fossil fuels in this country, in the UK, we can allegedly have better energy security is simply false, because that fossil energy gets sold on the open market.
Agreed.
So the whole of the government's case, as soon as you start to look at it in any detail, starts to fall apart.
But we are going to need fossil fuels after 2050.
No, we're absolutely not. And in fact,
the
2050 target is too late. We ought to be showing actual, genuine leadership. I mean, we're talking about the costs here. What we're going to see horribly clearly, Tom, in the next couple of years is the costs of inaction. And what I mean by that is two things. Firstly, we're going to see a lot more people literally struggling to pay their bills because, for example, their roofs are not insulated and they don't have air source heat pumps and solar panels, which they should have been having installed for them by the government and local authorities years ago. And secondly, we are going to see over the next couple of years a ramping up of climate chaos and weather chaos. I'm afraid to have to tell you and listeners, the El Nino event that has now started is going to rupture maximum temperatures around the world. It's
Rupert, listen, I accept
we have to be very clear about those costs. Right?
I get
those costs are in the long run. And not just in the long run, they are.
I get it, but I just
the kind of costs we're talking about.
I'm afraid I just don't think that argument works anymore, because I think people, rightly or wrongly, I'm not saying whether I agree with. I just think that people look at what it is Britain has done to decarbonise, look at other nations who are far more polluting, and say, "What? It's all on us, is it? It's all on the difference Britain is going to make to protect millions of people from dying of rainfall or storms or heat."
Not all on us. We just have to play our part. I mean, what's so sad is whenever a supposedly patriotic party like the Conservatives says things like, "Oh, we're just one poor little country, you know, what can we do? How can we contribute?" We ought to be absolutely proud of being global leaders on this. And Theresa May, well, not really. Not anymore.
Oh, so we're not?
No, we're not. We're simply not. I mean, if you listen now to what the Committee on Climate Change have been saying, for example, then that was led until very recently by Lord Deben, a Conservative peer.
Yep.
If you listen to what they're saying now, they are saying, we have forfeited our position of global leadership on this. And that's a terrible position for this country to have got into. Well, and what we say in the Climate Majority Project is that we believe that the polls show, and our own private research also, by the way, shows that there is a moderate, silent, concerned climate majority in this country who really want us to play our part, and they want the co-benefits, and they want to see a future in which their kids are not going to face endlessly escalating weather and climate chaos.
All right. Good to speak to you. Rupert Read, co-founder of the Climate Majority Project.